Greetings, my friends. Thank you for joining me again today for the second part on this theme of God's providence. Today we're going to move into the second chapter of Job, and I suppose that the title of this particular message is Things Just Got a Whole Lot Worse. Now, in my Bible, the subheader is Satan Attacks Job's Health. And I want us to read from verses 1 to verse 10, and then just to have a few thoughts concerning that. So the Bible reads, "Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, 'From where have you come?' Satan answered the Lord and said, 'From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it.' And the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason.' Then Satan answered the Lord and said, 'Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face.' And the Lord said to Satan, 'Behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life.' So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, 'Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die.' But he said to her, 'You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?' In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." Now, think about the first chapter where we read about Job losing his children and all his earthly possessions, having everything taken away from him. The emotional stress and impact that must have been placed on Job, and the difficulty that he must have experienced. But now we're seeing a transition into Job being impacted physically now, his health being tested. And, you may be asking yourself at this period of time, well, how are we considering the providence of God when everything just looks nothing more than, going in the wrong direction for Job? Where is God's providence? And I think sometimes that thought crops up in the life of the Christian. And many Christians are persuaded by these so-called prosperity preachers or this new age teaching that simply says to the Christian that you don't have to go through turmoil, you don't have to experience difficulties. The shadow of the valley of death doesn't exist today because you have the power in words to speak against it and to proclaim good things on your life. But I would ask you this question. If that is a thought that you have, if that is something that you believe, do you then believe that you're simply greater than Job and all these saints and these patriarchs in the Bible that have been afflicted and impacted with something that has been so troubling? That's a question that only you can answer. But I think the Bible is very clear on that we are not free from those difficulties or these trials. But we are assured by God's ultimate providence. Now, when we consider that things just got a whole lot worse, there's so many things that me in particular, and I wonder if you can relate to. We're experiencing one difficult period and then transitioning into another difficult period, and it's prolonging itself, and it's going on for such a long period of time, and it's weighing you down, and it feels like that millstone that's hanging around your neck, and there's just no relief. And we see here as well that Job has people around him still. And we'll see that further as we transition into the further verses where we see Job's three friends. But look at his wife here, where she simply says to him in verse 9, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Curse God. See the influence of his wife saying, "Why don't you curse God? Why don't you speak bad against God? Why don't you forsake God? Why don't you disregard God because things have just got a whole lot worse? God doesn't care about you. There's no way that he has any concern for you. Look at your circumstance. But Job responds and says to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. And then the Bible goes on to say, shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil? And then it concludes just as the first chapter did, if you remember, that the first chapter concluded in verse 22, where it says, in all this Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. On this occasion it says, in all this Job did not sin with his lips. He didn't curse God. He didn't fall into the trap of cursing God as his wife said that he should. But Job knew in that explanation, shall we not receive both good and evil? To simply say, shall we not experience great times and difficult times? Shall we not receive times of prosperity and times of difficulty? Job is not saying that God is the cause of evil. To simply place God as the cause of evil is to commit an ultimate heresy. God is not the cause of evil. Yes, God must permit evil to happen, otherwise it could not come to pass, or it could not simply be. But God does not cause evil. I wonder if you've considered the story of Judas, that in God's ultimate decree and will, that Judas would betray Christ. And yet we see it's the wickedness of Judas for the 30 pieces of silver, for his own greed, that he would betray Christ. And so it is Judas who's responsible for the wicked committed. I just want you to consider that, because that's a very dangerous area that Christians fall into, where they somehow attribute the cause of evil to God. But that is completely wrong. And it does not agree with what Scripture teaches. But back to what we're focusing on here. Job having things turned even further upside down. And yet he still understands that he sits under the ultimate providence of God. And you know, as I said, have you had anything that's pressed since the last time that we spoke that's really increased your struggles or your difficulties and has made you feel as if God has simply forsaken you and that you don't sit under his providential care? But you can be comforted and you can be assured, because if we go back to the early verses, we see that God said, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. And then we see once again that Satan is given permission to trouble Job, but the boundaries are still there, because Satan has no right to take Job's life. And so, my friends, you have to be comforted and encouraged that Satan is always bound by the restrictions that it is God who's sovereign and not him. So if you are going through a difficult or challenging time, let your rest be in God. Whatever the outcome, know that it is within God's ultimate decree and will, and know that you can have peace in the storm. Remember the story of the disciples when they were so frightened and troubled on the boat while Jesus was resting and sleeping. And then Jesus wakes and he calms the storm. That is the God that we serve, who has ultimate sovereignty over every circumstance and challenge and difficulty. And so I want to encourage you today. I want to ask that you will continue to stay on this journey with me as we consider the truth of Scripture and God's ultimate providence. You take care and stay blessed.